stopped. The legislature seems to have almost been in session almost right after that, and continuously so. And so there's been a number of issues which we've had an opportunity to weigh in on. And when there was a discussion of me coming and speaking to you all today, I thought that two of the most, at least written about issues this session that concerned me were both the budget for the Department of Justice and the Sanctuary Cities bill that Valerie Hodges put up, HB 1148. So I thought I'd discuss both of those issues with y'all briefly, and then allow some opportunities to get some questions answered that maybe you hadn't had an opportunity to ask. You know, the first issue I think I'll take up is the Sanctuary Cities bill, because that is actually coming up in June 8th, tomorrow. You know, one of the problems that I think we face here in this country is a disregard for the rule of law. And you know, there were a couple of very well-known criminologists who in the 80s produced a theory called the broken windows theory. And that theory basically said that if we allow small fractions of the law to continue to go unenforced, that would only breed to additional crime. And so, and I embrace that. I think that's true. Because what we have found is that when we allow people to come into this country illegally, okay, and then we blatantly allow them to stay, and then we confer a right on them greater than we confer on the citizens in this country, then I believe we have a problem, and the rule of law has absolutely broken down. And so I work with both Representative Valerie Hodges and Representative Jay Morris. Each of them had a bill. Both of those bills, one, Valerie's bill was like a crime bill, I called it, and Jay's was like a victim's rights bill. And what Valerie's bill does is, and that's the one that's going to be up in Judiciary A tomorrow, what it does, it says that if a municipality or political subdivision of the state engages in a sanctuary city policy, of which the definition of what that policy is clearly spelled out in the bill, then that would prohibit that municipality or political subdivision from accessing public financing through the bond commission. And we think it's a very common sense bill. And so let me explain to you all, because I know there's been a lot of questions as to, well, what is a sanctuary city policy? Well, I'll give you an example. Each of you all, if you're here legally, if you're either naturalized or you were born in the United States and are a citizen, goes down the road and you're caught speeding, the police pull you over. The law enforcement officer comes out of his car. He says, "Can I see your driver's license?" You hand him your driver's license. What does he do? He takes that driver's license back to his vehicle. Why does he do that? Did any of y'all ever thought, why does he do that? He does that in order to check your criminal background, if you have any, the criminal history, and whether or not you're wanted in another jurisdiction or not. He checks the criminal background to give him a great appreciation for the person whom he stopped. Wanting to know, has this person ever been in trouble with the law? Have they ever violated any statute here in the state of Louisiana or any other jurisdiction? He also checks to find out if you're wanted in another jurisdiction. Why? So that he helps other law enforcement agencies around the country. It's a collaboration to bring people to justice, to bring people back to a jurisdiction that wants that particular person for a violation of the law. All right. So let's say that you're an illegal alien traveling in New Orleans, and you break the law there. You're stopped for speeding. Well, first, you shouldn't have a driver's license, because we don't issue driver's licenses to people who are not citizens. Well, when the officer asks, can I see your driver's license? You tell him no, that's a problem. Then he has to determine who you are. If he has a reasonable suspicion that you're here in this country illegally, he has to stop the interrogation. He doesn't have the ability to then go back and check Immigration and Customs most wanted list. He doesn't have the ability to check the Global Terrorist Watch list. He has to stop his investigation. He is prohibited from collaborating with federal law enforcement authorities. That is in the plain black and white text of the New Orleans Police Department's current policy. That is a problem, because what that does is it creates safe harbors. If you are running one of the notorious Mexican cartel operations out of Mexico, where would you send your people? You would send them into cities that safe harbor illegals, because if they are stopped for a minor infraction of the law, you don't have to worry about them being deported. You see the problem we create here? That is why this bill is so important. And we are working, last week in the Senate committee, there were a number of questions, good questions that were brought up by some senators concerning due process. Let me be clear. The bill, even in its current form, in no way takes away a municipality or political subdivision's due process access to the courts. However, if the legislature wants to add additional due processes, I am in no way against that. I have no problem with that. That being said, I am against any attempt to take the enforcement mechanism out of the bill. We're going to see what happens on that bill tomorrow in Judea. The second issue that seems to have got a little bit of ink is my attempt to have my own budget. Let me make sure that y'all understand how this all started. All of the statewide elected officials during the special session were required to go before the legislature and to ask them the effects of certain cuts, how certain cuts would have on the particular departments that they would run when we were in that fiscal dilemma. Remember? During that testimony, Secretary of State Shetler became very frustrated, both at the Appropriations Committee and at the Senate Finance. I shared with him that frustration of not being able to adequately shift resources inside of our office and consistently having to go to the Division of Administration and their mounds of regulations to determine how I could effectively allocate those resources to create those efficiencies in the office. The legislature, in response to that, said they understood and challenged us to give them an opportunity or an answer to that. Chairman Henry wrote a bill, House Bill 105, as a place marker in giving the Secretary of State the opportunity to give him his own budget and that flexibility. I agreed to partner with him in that. We wanted to make sure it was a good fit. We had the ability and the resources to ensure that we could write a bill that was not contrary to the statute or to the Constitution. At the last minute, then Senator, former Senator, the Secretary decided to withdraw from the bill, leaving us alone. I can understand the Secretary's position in that. However, I think it's important that constitutional officers be afforded the ability to control their budgets with legislative oversight. Nothing in the bill confers additional power on the Attorney General. This simply gives a constitutional officer, who I might add, the governor is one as well, the ability to manage his money with the oversight being the proper oversight, that being the legislature. When you don't have that, you then have a friction that exists between the governor and those statewide, or the ability for a conflict in that friction to exist. Because if I do something that is contrary to what the governor wants, he has the ability through the division to frustrate the ability of my expenditures. That's not how the Constitution was designed to work. That's not a proper exercise of Louisiana's Constitution. There was a reason that those who wrote the Constitution created those separate constitutional offices that were elected on the same, in the same manner that the governor was. There was a reason they wanted to separate them. Having the governor have the ability to control the purse over those statewide is not the proper way that the Constitution dictates the ability of the Attorney General to facilitate his office. In addition, it also restricts me from being able to create the types of efficiencies you all have been claiming need to be done inside of state government. There's been a tremendous amount of frustration here in this state over the ability of the legislature to get their hands around financing. Well, guess what? When you separate those budgets, when you allow different appropriations bills to move through, those legislators, I know I was one as a member of the U.S. House, have an opportunity to clearly see what's being spent. I used this and I was criticized for it, but look, I ask you this question. If I offer y'all, and I know many of y'all are journalists, so you naturally like to read, but if I come to you and I bring you a book and it's this thick, or I bring you 6 books that are this thick, and ask you to choose which one you're going to read, which one you're going to pick up. You're going to pick up the books that are broken up into smaller pieces. It's just inherently what we do as humans. I know. I'm guilty of doing the same. So the whole issue of bringing about this change was an opportunity to put before the legislature an opportunity to budget in a different manner. And I'll close with this. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the complete definition of insanity. If we don't allow our elected officials to think and work outside the box and then expect them to solve the problems that we're consistently facing here in this state, we are kidding ourselves. So those are 2 issues that I thought that were important to you all. I hope that we've explained, I've explained both of those issues in a manner that gives you an opportunity to get some feedback on them, and I'll welcome any questions that you may have.
Question. I think on the sanctuary cities issue is, should local police be enforcing federal law? And that comes up over and over and over again when it comes to manpower and resources. If you're tying up officers liaisoning with federal officials, they're not doing their core job, which is patrolling the streets, correct? That's the criticism that a lot of people have come up with when in response to sanctuary city bill. What's your response to that?
The question is whether or not enforcing immigration laws ties up local resources, if I would paraphrase it. And under this particular bill, that point is moot, because this bill only affects people who are already in the custody of our law enforcement officers. The policies in New Orleans don't say you have to enforce immigration laws. It says that you cannot collaborate with federal authorities in regards to the person that you already have in your custody. So again, and that's a very important part, there's been a confusion. Some of it is being confused in order to kill it. This bill only deals, sanctuary cities deal with policies that prohibit our law enforcement officers to collaborate with the federal government, dealing with people who are already in their control. People who they have a reasonable suspicion of believing have already violated a state statute.
But Attorney General, is it appropriate for the state to impose penalties on cities, on local government, for not going along with federal law. I mean, we've had a push-pull with the feds for years over seat belts, over speed limits, all kinds of things that we have waited to go ahead and implement the law until we risk losing money. Is it appropriate for the state to do this, considering the push-pull we always have with them?
The question is, and I'll try to make sure I paraphrase this, is it appropriate to penalize a local jurisdiction for a failure of the federal government to implement their law? I think it is absolutely appropriate because, and here's the reasoning why. There's no excuse for breaking the law. In the issues of seatbelt or in the issues of speed limits, we said as a state under the 10th Amendment and the U.S. Constitution that the state dictated the speed limit, that the state dictated whether or not a state should allow a person to drive down the road without a seatbelt or a helmet for that matter. The federal government used the power to purse in order to entice and basically coerce those states to implement laws or policies that they saw fit. This is a matter of law. It is against the law to knowingly, willfully, and not cooperate with the federal government when a person is in this country illegally. That is a matter of federal law. When our duly elected officials who swear to uphold the laws of this country and the Constitution embark upon policies that contradict the very oath that they have sworn to uphold, it is absolutely necessary for the legislature to then impose an enforcement mechanism on them. Because if not, then why should we enforce the penalty when someone breaks into your house? They might be poor, it might need whatever they take out of your house.
I'm curious about your opposition to, there was an effort to change where it would be the courts to determine what is a sanctuary city instead of in your office, and whether you can still be supporting the bill as much if that change is made.
The question was whether or not I supported some of the suggestions to allow there to be additional due process in bringing it to the courts. I support it. I absolutely support it. I have no problem with creating a situation under which there's a violation of law and our office investigates it, or a violation of the statute, and then brings it before the 19th Judicial District in order to ask for a declaratory judgment. In no way do I have a problem with that. But let me make sure that y'all understand something. I am a staunch believer in due process. And any time that we can create additional mechanisms of creating the ability so that the person who is accused has additional means of due process is fine with me. However, with that said, sometimes people like to use due process as a matter of cluttering the courts and frustrating the means to the end.
It just kind of feels a little bit like your involvement and your role in this is becoming a political issue. That people are saying this is a power grab by you, also pointing to the budget in the same way. And so I'm just curious if you were removed from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that the reason that exists is because I don't get to write the headlines to the papers. Okay, and I have not in any way ever in my testimony made any notion that I was trying to grab power. However, that has been a common theme that the media seems to want to take in order to sell their papers. I'm fine with that. It's wrong, but that is in no way indicative of the two things that we're doing. Yes, Melinda.
In terms of the budget bill and the request to get a separate budget bill, can you provide an example of some instance where the Division of Administration or the Governor's Office has been a problem for you in getting approval of a BA7 or some other group to shuffle money around your budget?
Well, let me step back for an instance. I went back and discussed with those who, in my office, who had been there for quite some time. It was frequent. There was a frequent practice for the past governor, the division, to deny BA7s to the prior Attorney General. Okay? We also had a BA7.
What's BA7?
A BA7 is a means of being able to transfer money or to get additional money inside of your budget when you may need it. So it's the ability to bring in additional funds. It's a process by which you go to the legislature and say, listen, we've recognized that we have this pot of money. We recognize that we need to spend it in this particular way. It was not a particular appropriation, so therefore could you appropriate this money to us?
So you have examples from the past?
Yes, it was done quite frequently. I asked the prior commissioner.
So that's not been a current problem for you?
We haven't had that opportunity to exist yet, but why not take away the tendency to have that kind of friction? We have had some issues where we believe the division has frustrated our ability to efficiently use our money wisely. I'll give you an example. Just last week, in preparing for a travel arrangement that I had, I needed to rent a vehicle. Renting it using the Division of Administration's policy would cost me $1,000 more than if I simply picked up the phone and did it myself. Okay? Now, it's not that Jay doesn't want me to be able to save that money. There's a claim by him that I have to fall under his regulations, and that those regulations are stiff. The problem is that the division is designed to watch over the finances and budget the different departments that the governor has in control, over 60,000 somewhat odd employees. The statewide office holders make up about $400 million in a $24–25 billion process. We're elected under the same mechanism as the governor. We're accountable to the voters. We should have the ability to have the legislature appropriate that money to us and work within the confines of our own demise is something we don't like that. To be able to allocate those funds between different divisions. In Mississippi, for instance, the legislature blocks the appropriation for the Attorney General. He can move money in and out as he so chooses between his divisions without having the governor being able to determine whether or not he likes that or not.
But even under the separate bill, wouldn't you still fall under, you would still fall under state procurement laws and a lot of those travel regulations and those kind of things that are coming down? Like, I don't feel like one is necessarily.
No, that's not necessarily true, because those regulations, as I appreciate it, I could be wrong, all fall or promulgated under Title 39. We're trying to divest ourselves away from that. Look, nothing will allow, we have to remember something. There is oversight. The legislative order that we would welcome, and in fact, I met with him as this bill moved through the legislative process to make sure that I understood the things that he would require in order to make sure that the money that we spent was properly spent as a matter of law. This gives us discretion. The governor gets discretion. Why? Because he gets to appoint the Commissioner of Administration.
Okay, thank you, Attorney General. I got kind of a follow-up to Melinda. Can you name one example of something you would do that you can't do now if you had control of your own budget? And then my second question is on the sanctuary cities issue. It affects a lot of entities that don't really have much to do with New Orleans government, like the Port of New Orleans, Superdome. I mean, the penalties if New Orleans NOPD doesn't go along with the law, some of the entities affected, particularly I'm thinking the Port of New Orleans, don't really have much say over what's going on in terms of immigration enforcement. So can you explain to me why we should be yanking dollars from somewhere like the Port of New Orleans if there's an issue with immigration enforcement?
You want to take the immigration one first? That seems to be the long one. I'd have to remember.
Sure. I also want to hear an example of
the first question was, can you give an example of something that you would like to do that currently you believe you're prohibited from doing? What I will tell you is, yes, I'll give you an example. We want to be able to transform and reform the Department of Justice and be able to determine whether or not we actually need X number of people in one particular division or we could use people in another division. The ability to make those to make that transformation or reforming that is not seamless, because we have to then put it before the Division of Administration. It's an additional step in the process. Certain things, like I talked about the travel, the ability to save the state $1,000 for renting a vehicle is absolutely precluded from that. Okay? On top of the fact that I may mention that I believe there's a constitutional problem here. I do not believe that the Division of Administration has the constitutional right to promulgate rules and regulations that they oversee over me. The legislature does. But that's not specifically what the legislature did in Title 39, as I appreciate that. The second question is I'm going to try to paraphrase it, is basically, do you think it's unfair to...
I guess I'm trying to understand why in the bill certain construction dollars would be yanked from entities. It seems a widespread group of entities.
Well, because it's really not, because the
Question, yeah, the question.
The question is she believes that the bill, the Sanctuary Cities bill, is broad in basically affecting potential projects that have nothing to do with law enforcement, I guess you could say, or nothing to do with who created the policy, maybe. And that part is not. If that is the question, I would tell you that's not a correct interpretation of the current bill. Look.
So you're saying if they didn't go along, let's say the bill became law, if they didn't go along with what the bill says, and there was a halt on construction dollars, that the Port of New Orleans, the Superdome, and some of these other entities in New Orleans wouldn't be affected?
They would not be affected. That's absolutely correct. It's important to note. So the current policy that deems New Orleans under the bill a sanctuary city policy is in place by the New Orleans Police Department. Okay? The bill would only affect the New Orleans Police Department's ability to access public financing. It doesn't have this broad sweep that would catch the Superdome and the Convention Center and the ports. That is what they claim. Of course, a lot of times what they claim is not true, but they claim it only because they're trying to frustrate the process. I would challenge them to show me where in the bill it says that. It does not. It says that it basically deems what the policy is. Logic would say that the person who implemented the policy would be the person who it affects.
Okay,
You
so
think
you're
it's
saying
logically, though.
the only,
That's not how that bill
I'm sorry, there are
That's
lots of
how I
different
appreciate it,
interpretations.
Melinda. Again, the question is the belief that the bill has broad sweeping implications. Let me give you an example. Let's use Lafayette. Okay, the Lafayette Sheriff's Department. I know it's hard to distinguish between the city of New Orleans and NOPD, and I get that. Okay, Lafayette Parish Sheriff's Department. They have a policy that says they will no longer hold illegals in their possession or question whether or not they're in the country illegally. That's a policy that the sheriff implements. What in the bill would determine that the sheriff's policy would affect the Lafayette Consolidated Government's ability to access public financing when, in fact, Joe DeRell's not the parish president, Joe Robideau had nothing to do with the implementation of that policy. You see what I'm saying? It should affect the person whose policy is implementing.
Okay, but you've got NOPD and you're talking about elected officials. That individual is appointed.
Right, but the mayor, that's right, but the mayor gets to instruct him.
So I just want to be clear on what it's affecting, because my understanding of the bill, many people's understanding of the bill was that it was going to affect construction dollars to a number of entities in New Orleans. So you're saying if they were to ignore the bill, the implications for both Lafayette and New Orleans would be just affect NOPD or just affect?
Well,
What's the question?
the question is, what exactly would the bill affect? Let me back you know, she brought something to my attention. And again, this is kind of getting into the weeds of the bill. However, the city of New Orleans appoints the police superintendent, correct?
Right.
The city, the mayor has some discretion as to the instructions that he gives the superintendent, okay? Whether or not the bill would impact the city of New Orleans directly for an action that the superintendent took in order to put in place a policy that would be deemed a sanctuary city policy is questionable. I would say that I would agree that if we put in the due process, the courts would narrowly interpret that, okay, and to affect just those particular entities. It may affect the whole city of New Orleans, potentially, but it wouldn't affect the Superdome, that's a separate commission. It wouldn't affect the convention center, that's a separate commission. The port has a different authority. Those entities are not having a say in whether or not the policy should be tailored towards a sanctuary city or opposed to it. Again, bringing the courts in, as we mentioned earlier, may help to clarify that. Again, I'm not opposed to that at all.
The papers have been full of meetings between the governor and lawyers and the oil and gas companies. Could you give us a brief on what's going on and give us some suggestion about what the future might hold?
So the question was that there's been a number of headlines recently involving the coastal lawsuits and exchanges between the governor and the industry. I would tell you that we intervened in the case prior to the governor. We welcomed the governor's intervention. Of course, I'm a little hesitant to talk about litigation, being that I'm a lawyer, in the case. But what I would say as a general matter of statement is that we are looking towards trying to work with all of the parishes, coastal parishes in Louisiana, as well as the industry, to try to come to some resolution in these matters. I would not feel comfortable commenting above that because of the fact that it is ongoing litigation.
Thank you. You've mentioned efficiencies within the Attorney General's office and trying to make it easy to obtain those efficiencies. Could you state on a scale of 1 to 10 you've now had 4.5 months to analyze the office you inherited? 1 being it's really well run, very efficient. 10 meaning it needs some major structural overhaul. And can you elaborate on some of the changes you'd like to see made if this bill does become law and you have more authority than you do now?
Yeah, I would tell you that I believe that the office is in much need of major reform. I'll give you an example. We found that we don't even have a centralized case management system in that office. Now, if you're not a lawyer, that might cause you to scratch your head a little bit. I can promise you, I see a good judge, retired judge here, and a couple of other lawyers that are here. They know what I'm talking about. Not having a centralized case management system doesn't allow us to easily track the cases and to track whether or not those cases are properly moving through the process. That is like 101 for law firms, okay? I mean, that is like the basic necessity for any modern law firm we have today. We have some technical issues, some technology issues that I don't think the office has been brought in or is basically using some of the technology that's out there in a way that we could best benefit the taxpayers of Louisiana. We have a number of challenges inside of that office. Let me just say something. I'm not saying that in an effort to criticize my predecessor. For whatever reason, they chose not to use those dollars for that. That was his decision. I would tell you that if we're going to run one of the largest law firms in the state for the taxpayers of Louisiana, it should operate like all other law firms in this state potentially operate.
Thank you.
Regarding rule of law, do you agree with Inspector General Street's office that it's your office's responsibility to investigate and quote compelling evidence of violations of revised statute 14133 by private companies that file falsified forms with state government agencies? And if so, are there any conflicts of interest or other prohibitions that would preclude your office from investigating this quote's compelling evidence?
The question was, I'm paraphrasing, is basically if I believe that there are any issues with the Inspector General's investigation of potential criminal
No,
violation.
they say it's your office's, do you agree that they say it's your office's
Responsibility. So-
to investigate private companies that file
I would say,
falsified documents?
absolutely, I would, if the Inspector General said that it would fall under our responsibility to investigate criminal matters or people who fraudulently, who commit fraud against the state, as a matter of fact, contractually or not, I would say that yes, it's our responsibility to do so. We work with the legislative auditor, we work with the Inspector General, we work with the state police as well, in order to try to, of course, with the limited amount of resources that we have, and of course, not having the ability to efficiently move money throughout our budget, to basically investigate those matters. But yes, it is our responsibility to do so.
And there's no prohibition that you know of in your office that preclude you from doing that?
I know of no prohibition. Now, I know that the Inspector General, as I appreciate it, is actually prohibited from engaging in criminal investigations. He's supposed to pass them off. Now, sometimes they pass, like the legislative auditor, let me give you that as an example. He does an audit, he finds potential criminal wrongdoings or inappropriate behavior. He actually, I think, he submits a report, one to the district attorney because they have original jurisdiction over the prosecution of those matters, and to us, and then of course to the legislature. With the Inspector General, he can absolutely send those files over to our office. We have a criminal investigation unit, and we have the ability to investigate them. The ability to prosecute them would be based upon the position of the particular district attorney in that jurisdiction as to whether or not he wanted to prosecute it or not.
Thank you.
I'm curious,
Let me get in, because I don't think he asked the question. Y'all getting double servings.
Your comment about the car rental through state government and car rental on a fly right out of your pocket, really, why shouldn't we see that as an indictment? Because the state of Louisiana has a purchasing department, professionals, been there for a long time, and the state of Louisiana itself is smaller than the city of Houston. So why should we turn that over to you? Why shouldn't that comment, lack of knowledge of why that bid occurred and why it exists, why should we turn that purchasing over to you?
Well, because first of all, I'm answerable to the voters in the same way that the governor is. Why do you allow the governor and the division to have that particular authority? There is legislative oversight, and I would tell you that it's a particular indictment that maybe the division is not doing a good job. Again, I'm not criticizing Jay, he's just been in office that long. But we recognize and we all complain about fraud, waste, or abuse. Waste in state government, but yet when every time we come up with an answer to be able to address that waste, there comes some excuse as to why we cannot, because it's a matter of law or not. I answer to the voters in the same manner that the governor does. I would tell you that from a travel policy perspective, the legislative auditor has the ability to be able to rent that vehicle in the same manner that I would like to. Do you think that it's not an indictment, that he gets to do it, and that the division tells me, a constitutionally elected officer, I can't? Follow up?
Isn't that exactly the point? You were independently elected, so now you can say this on a statewide basis is a mistake, not just for your little single entity?
Well, I would hope, absolutely, I would hope that the question, again, I know, the question is, isn't that a great example of why? I would tell you, yeah, I would like to use that as an opportunity. That's kind of why we didn't include all of the statewide in it when discussing it with Chairman Henry, is that, look, we want to take a shot at this. Okay, we want an opportunity to then go out, yes, and go back to the division, or not to the division, to go to the legislature. So let me show you where we created some efficiencies. And then the legislature has the responsibility to question the division as to why they don't do things like the Secretary of State, or the Commissioner of Agriculture, or the Attorney General, or the Lieutenant Governor, giving us the opportunity to be experiments into creating those particular efficiencies. That would be the answer that I would say.
Let's just do one more.
Oh, yeah, I gotta fly.
I just wanted to touch on another topic that you've been vocal about recently, the Obama directive on school restrooms. And kind of two-part, just could you tell us why you felt like that was an issue you wanted to get involved in? And the second part is the legislators have asked you for your opinion on the governor's executive order on discrimination. And so I was just kind of curious if you've had a chance to look at that.
Yeah, the question is, why did we wade into the president's guidance letter through the Department of Justice and DOE in regards to transgender bathrooms? And then the follow-up to that was as to whether or not I would be issuing an opinion based upon a request of 32 somewhat odd state legislators asking about the governor's executive order regarding discrimination surrounding LGBT issues. I'll take it first. First of all, we waded into it because we believe it's unconstitutional. We believe that the president clearly overreached. I mean, think about where we are in this country. We got people losing their jobs. Our state's in a fiscal mess. And we're going to argue as to whether or not we got enough bathrooms for everyone? It's ridiculous. On top of the fact that that in no way, okay, does the president or his appointees have the legal authority to require our children to share locker rooms or bathrooms with children of the opposite sex. The president is trying to define sex. That's the difference, okay? He's trying to create a class on his own. That's not the way we do things in this country. And in the second part, I will close by saying that the opinion is forthcoming. Thank you.